You're listening to World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world. And here are your hosts, Aingeal Rose and Ahonu.
Well, you're very, very welcome. My name is Ahonu, and unfortunately we don't have our lovely Aingeal Rose with us again today. She seems to be missing more often than not. She usually sits in this seat right beside me here, but in her place today we have a gentleman by the name of Nicolas Mezzanato. And that's a lovely Italian name. We'll get to that in a few minutes too. But I want to introduce Nicolas by way of us having met Nicolas when we arrived in Central Oregon in Redmond, very close to Bend, Oregon. And he came into our circle of friends who were discussing all kinds of things metaphysical, all kinds of things spiritual. And what I find absolutely delightful about Nicolas is the fact that his history doesn't seem to fit with where he is now. And I want to talk to him today about that transition. And where he came from is very different to where he is now. You, Nicolas, are actually a veteran, aren't you, of wars in where? Iraq?
Yeah, the Iraq War.
So tell us a little bit about that and how, give us the transition of how you can move from a confrontational situation like that into this really beautiful spiritual place where you are now.
Wow, I didn't even think about it like that. But yeah, I was from Portland, Oregon originally, and kind of grew up with I don't know if you want to call it a hero's complex, but like the guy that always kind of wanted to run into the orphanage and save the burning building,
Right, yeah.
Always kind of that type of a person,
Yeah.
Whether that was some internal thing or some learned kind of Western society's idea. I'm not sure, but I went and joined the Army, specifically requested the 101st Airborne, and was deployed to Iraq in like 2004, 2006 time frame. So I was there for a year, but it was
spread over two.
That during that time of pre-deployment, deployment, and coming back.
Gotcha.
So pretty much I was there in 2005 was the most time I was there.
And did you actually see and were you engaged in conflict in that time?
Yes. When you say like engaged in conflict, it's really hard to give a mental idea of what that is, because we don't, all we have reference to is kind of like the movies that we've seen in Western society, what war is like, or what war is, or because many veterans have different experiences. I know veterans that went to war and like never fired around,
right? Yes, yeah.
But they were in various areas, and it's not like they asked to go there. It's just kind of the luck of the draw that it all came down. We happened to be in a pretty horrible place at probably the worst time. There was a book called Black Hearts, written by Jim Frederick.
I've heard about that.
And he died about a year ago, I think. Unfortunately, but he wrote an amazing book, and if you read the book Black Hearts, it's called One Platoon's Descent into Madness, and that kind of gives you an idea of what type of a tour it was.
Right.
So
you were witnessing really the human descending into kind of chaos in a way.
Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, it was kind of a rude awakening. I'll call it rude because it was very immediate as soon as I got there. Just being around death and being around violence on that scale, that type of violence was, I had never been exposed to anything like that before.
Right.
And I kind of fell right into it, and it was kind of a year of absolute madness, yeah.
When you say you fell into it, and let's be clear to our viewers and our listeners, we don't dwell on the negativity here by any means, and we always try to keep everything upbeat and that. But of necessity, though, we always recognise too that we live in the world, our feet are on the ground, and as such we have to recognise that there are events in our lives that bring us here. And this is obviously one of the events that brought you here. This is part of our experiencing. And when you say you fell into it, do you mean you fell into that kind of chaotic mindset, do you mean? or you just rode in with the orders of what you
I
had
was
to do?
very surprised. I mean, you have an idea of how you're going to react to those situations, especially in the male world. I think that a lot of, especially in Western society, we grew up with this idea of wanting to kind of prove ourselves as men, that we can handle ourselves in violent situations or be a hero of sorts. I think that is down in there. And being exposed to that world, meaning I fell into it, was I immediately accepted that I was there, but also I kind of accepted the fact that it was very possible that I was going to die. So it put me in a place of, it kind of blew the fear out of the way, because it was more of just being present and saying, okay, yeah, there's a high probability I'm going to die in this place based on the casualties we were taking, and to accept that.
And did that give you a kind of a sense of invincibility? Like, were you did you feel a sense of bravado that you were invincible somehow? And
Yes, I mean, now looking back, I realize obviously that wasn't the case, but thinking back to where I was in it, it was very much a feeling of invincibility, and I saw that in a lot of the other guys around us as well.
Yeah. And tell us about, because we want to talk about spirituality,
Sure.
Tell us about that time. I want you to stay in that time frame for the moment. I know a lot of Americans are very religious. So you obviously would have witnessed a kind of a religious, a devotion there that obviously kept some people going. Were you?
Yeah, I had it as well. I was Christian at the time, very much. That was something that I held as kind of a rock to keep me going.
Right.
Was a faith that, that I was protected, and there were many times that I felt that way. And the thing is, it doesn't matter if it's psychological or reality or whatever, but there was times that I felt that I was kind of protected.
That your God was the right God, that it was a holy war in a sense.
Well, no, I meant more of in the realm of like protection of.
Okay.
Of kind of miraculous things happening and like things blowing up around us. I mean, there were many times where, I'm not like saying that these were miracles, because it could totally be a roll of the dice, and I'm just the one that's sitting here, and everybody else rolled the dice and didn't get those dice.
Yes.
But there were times where like huge explosions would happen. I mean, not even 6 meters away from us, and I remember one time there was 3 of us that were blown over by a blast, and shrapnel went everywhere, but it didn't hit any of us. It hit one of my sergeants in the rear end.
Oh dear.
But it was so small that it didn't really matter, and we kind of laughed about it. But I mean, there was times like that, and there were times where my truck drove over bombs, and then the truck behind us hit the bomb, but even then no one died. I mean, there were really, it shaved the whole front end of the truck off. And there were lots of times like that where I felt that was there, and I kind of attribute it to that sort of faith. Now I realize that type of a faith, is much larger than just a single kind of facet of reality, and it doesn't really matter what I had faith in. It probably would have worked.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But at the time, obviously, it's absolutely necessary. And for example, to put it in context, if a Muslim was in that situation, their belief in Allah would be just as powerful and all-encompassing, and that would be the faith of that, or indeed any belief system, any belief system whatsoever. But it's necessary to have it, though.
I think I probably would do better now, the way that I hate to call it psychology, but I guess understanding, or my kind of limited knowledge of how things come together would probably put me in a much better situation. I probably wouldn't have had as many, problems with post-traumatic stress when I got back.
Right.
Those types of things,
Now, I do want to talk about post-traumatic stress, because we've had quite a lot of exposure, really, with people who we've interviewed, as well as people in extended family and so on. And indeed, there's a high percentage of people in the United States who have been in the military and are suffering and continue to suffer from post-traumatic stress. But you seem to have done something about it. That's what I'm finding very attractive. You seem to have kind of cleared it in your head. And a couple of times in our conversation, you said, if I had known now what I know then, or if I did it. So in other words, there has been a transition. When did that transition begin?
It really started when I came back and I was discharged from the military for post-traumatic stress. I just got to a point where it just didn't work anymore. I couldn't function in the military, and so I was discharged, just medically discharged for post-traumatic stress. And I started to get into yoga and to kind of studying, because when you say yoga, you think, doing standing on your head and bending and things like that. Yes. But more of the meditation side of yoga. There's four divisions of yoga, which I could talk about later. But Hatha yoga, which is the postures, is just one subdivision of karma yoga, which is, anyway, I can go into that later. But the time that it really started to separate was when I realized that breaking down who we are, and I'm not saying that I'm free from it. I'm not free from it. I still suffer from post-traumatic stress, and the depression still hits me, and I get ripped into places where I'm not able to get out of bed and things like that. I'm not able to kind of answer my phone, and there's lots of symptoms that come over. Right. But what the difference between then and now is that I know that post-traumatic stress is something that I gathered, that I didn't have at one point, and I had gathered it, and that means that there is a difference between me and that. So there was an identity associated with post-traumatic stress, especially when people are saying, "Oh, well, you constantly making excuses for me," like, "Oh, well, you've been through a lot, and,
yes.
And that kind of reinforced that identity, and so when I thought about PTSD, I thought of it as me. To where now I know it's something that I suffer from, but because of the yoga, it's put a distance between me and that post-traumatic stress. Wow. To where I can look at it and say, okay, I may be having a flush thing, I may be crying in public for no reason, I may be having these things that are post-traumatic stress related, but I don't have to think that is Nicholas or who I am. Right. It is something that I've gathered, much like a lot of the belief systems and identities and things that I've kind of accumulated over the years. Now I'm at the point where through the yoga I'm pushing some distance between that, some distance between me and my emotions, to where I used to think that I'm angry. It's like, no, well, I'm becoming angry, and that's not who I am. That's
just very interesting that you should say that, because we find ourselves liking the I am concepts, where we say I am as opposed to I wish or I want or, that kind of thing. I am. And indeed, when people ask me my name, I say I am Ahonu as opposed to my name is. Do you know? So in a sense, when you say I am, there's an ownership there. So when people say, for example, I am depressed or I am sad, they're actually taking ownership of that in a way that I find really interesting, because where I come from in Ireland, we have, in the Irish language now I'm specifically talking about, if you were to say, I am sad, you would say, Tá brón orm. And that means sadness is on me.
Right, yeah.
As opposed to, I am
sad.
Do you see? So when you say something is on me, it means that you have the power to lift it off. And the same thing is, when you say, I have a cold, in Irish you would say, there's a cold on me. Do you know? So you can lift it off. Yeah. Now, I find that interesting in the way you're describing that. So you were able to separate yourself then, in a sense, from this post-traumatic stress symptoms, let's say. You were able to say, well, I recognize that, but it's not me. Is that how? Yeah,
to a certain extent, that's exactly what I'm describing. And that doesn't go just with post-traumatic stress. That is something that I've accumulated. But the truth of the matter is, if you take it a step further, every thought that you have in your brain, every emotion that you have, every identity, every belief that you have was gathered. You didn't just come up with it on your own. Everything that you have. Yes. And so like when we're talking about our physical body and our mind, there are two temporary things that are not eternal or whatever we're seeking, right? And in spirituality, when we say that someone is spiritual, they're seeking something outside of the dimension of the physical, which the brain is also physical. Your thoughts are physical as much as you want to make them not, because we can't see it. But like a light bulb, right, or this microphone, the microphone is physical, the sound is coming out, but also the electricity that's going through there is also physical. It's subtle, but it's still physical.
Yes.
So when we think about our thoughts and our emotions and things that we have, like when you say, like, who are you? Well, I'm I am my name, whatever they call you, but then you go into kind of what you do, or if you have kind of evolved past the what you do, I'm a painter, I'm a whatever, usually what you do for a job, then you move on to things of what you are in terms of idealistic things. I'm a courageous person. I'm a healer. I am a this. I am a that. But the truth of the matter is those are identities that you've taken on to yourself. They're not necessarily the truth of who you are. Whatever eternal is in you. Everything else is kind of temporary.
Yeah.
So when we're thinking in terms of post-traumatic stress, am I not suffering from it? No, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm not suffering anymore. I'm just hoping at some point that will be. But at least I have the point where the gig is up. No longer am I going to be controlled by things that are that I have gathered over time. And the process, the spiritual process of yoga is sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly shedding all of those things that you've gathered that you think are you.
Do you think, Nicholas, that you practicing yoga and how well it has worked for you, do you think that it is a panacea for all kinds of post-traumatic stress?
Yes, I think that post-traumatic stress, it's hard to define it, but there are within the pantheon of post-traumatic stresses, there's a lot of different ways that it reacts. First of all, every individual on the planet is different, and they receive things differently and process things differently. But within the umbrella of PTSD, there's lots of different post-traumatic stress. Post-traumatic stress from sexual abuse, from trauma, from car accidents, from different things.
Sure.
They're going to react in different ways. Like I know there was a veteran who flew the UAVs, the unmanned vehicles, and
the drones.
The drones, yeah,
right.
And dropped bombs on lots and lots and lots of people. And this individual he was suffering greatly from post-traumatic stress. Now you take a guy like that, and then you take a door kicker person, and someone who was in constantly being shot at in close quarters, constantly having firefights in a house like this, that type of a person is going to have different symptoms. It's going to be, and I'm not going to say it absolutely is, but tends to be more on the realm of proximity, more along the realm of the violence, to where the person with that, they're not going to have those types of systems because they were sitting in a room with a little screen.
Yeah.
It's more
sounds like a video game.
But with that, it's more of I've seen a lot with that type of PTSD goes into the depression area, in the kind of moral injury category, as in they had a set that, like, I killed so many people, and maybe they'll play that over in their head, and their brain will play games with them and keep that rolling, yes. To where more of a physiological feeling can be for the door kicker guy, or the guy that was blown up a lot.
Yes.
I
do understand that difference, and I often wondered actually about those ones who are monitoring, flying the drones, and they could be in Virginia or San Diego and dropping stuff in Afghanistan or whatever. But I tended to think myself that they were so removed from it that it didn't affect them to that degree. But you're saying it does.
Some, yeah. And it also depends on the individual as well. And like when I say, if I knew what I do now going back, I could see it for kind of what it is. And that was the largest change that I've made in my kind of walk, or whatever path you want to call it, is that I've made the decision that I don't want to do anything unconsciously anymore.
Right.
What led me to do most of the things, and what leads most of us, we just don't know it, is that we're making choices, yes, but we're making unconscious choices. So when we say, oh, I got married and I had kids, if it's let's say it's a 30-year-old woman or whatever, and she got married and she had kids and she grew up wherever, and her parent, she said, oh, I did that because it was the right thing to do, well, we don't know that. That might have been her parents and whatever the belief system said, that if you're a woman and 30, you need to hurry up and get married, right? So you're making that choice, but it's an unconscious choice. Or like a lot of us came home and we drank a lot, and we gained a ton of weight. And I gained a lot of weight, lost a lot recently. But drinking and eating and feeding that, you think it's you say, oh, well, that's not your fault. It's like, well, you still made the choice. You just made it unconsciously.
Yes.
Or we find ourselves falling into relationships with someone that we have massive emotions with, or they do something for us, but that relationship is an unconscious relationship, and children come out of that. Like, all of those things, or that my job or my career we think, oh, well, we made those choices. Well, we did make those choices, we just made them unconsciously.
Yes.
And we as humans, the thing that kind of separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom is we can choose to do things consciously. A dog breathes, but you can't really teach. I mean, I'm sure you could teach it, but not a dog doesn't naturally know how to hold its breath, or breathe consciously, or eat consciously. If you put food in front of a dog, it's going to eat. Now, we as humans can eat unconsciously, or we can eat consciously. We can breathe consciously. We can, mate consciously. We can do all kinds of things consciously, and that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. And it sucks that it took till 32 to figure it out, but to make the agreement that I'm going to make choices in my life based on conscious choices versus being led by some compulsions that were derived from my childhood or past lives, or whatever you want to call the compulsions that are driven through us. And I'm not saying just bad compulsions, good compulsions. The compulsion to be a hero, or to help everyone, or to the point where it like destroys you, that you're trying to help others, Sure. Those are also kind of those
Well, speaking
deals.
about helping others, and you said a little while ago that you don't know really in what way you might be helping others. But this is one of the reasons that motivated me to actually ask you to come in, because I know, like, you're a fountain of wisdom now. And even just speaking about post-traumatic stress, and, we didn't set out with that intention really to talk about that. But obviously, that may be of great help to somebody who is listening or watching to this, because, as I said, it's out there. It's a serious problem for a lot of people in how to deal with that. And you've outlined for us, and this is what I wanted to get at. What was that catalyst that was kind of helping you to transform? So you started with the yoga, and you felt that helped you distance yourself from the pain and the suffering and the trauma of that. Now, I want to move more closer into the present day now. And you mentioned that this kind of realizations only started coming to you when you came back from the war, from the conflict, and that you were drinking and putting on weight and all of that. I'm sure those kinds of things happen to a lot of people, that they're trying to integrate back into society. And did you find it easier than most, do you think, or was it the same as most people, trying to get back into the routine of daily life?
One of the hardest things is is trying to grasp the realm of meaning anymore. Like, one of the when you're talking about people transitioning back into society, your version of a bad day is a very different version of someone else's bad day, and sometimes it puts you in a situation, especially in intimate relationships with a spouse or a partner or whatever, but also in workplace types of things. It puts you in a position where you end up kind of being the guy like, what are you complaining about, and that was one of the things that bothered, that was hard for me coming back in, is that coming from a sense like that, when you coming from such a horrendous place and watching death, and it's life and death. Very little is life and death here in the states that we live in, or at least the areas that we are now. I'm sure that there are cities where it's much more dangerous and violent, but even then, it's still not a thing where there's going to be 20 guys with AK-47s and,
with the intention
it's going to be, there's violence and there's gang violence, but it's not like, it was over there.
Yeah.
It puts you in a position where you don't have, it's very hard to relate, and sometimes you come off being extremely insensitive because you just don't care. Like, I don't care if your boss was yelling at you. Like, that's great.
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
small.
like, you're alive.
Meat,
Everybody's alive. You know, like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry that you're,
Yeah.
you know, whatever insert problem. But the thing that allowed me to kind of bridge that is those types of things are all relative. And a lot of people say, look, well, I could never imagine what you've been through. And I say, well, you can imagine, because one, you can imagine anything within reason. But where it is, the truth of the matter is it's relative. So you have a scale of what's the worst thing that you've ever been through, and you know the most pleasant thing you've ever been through, right?
Yeah.
And you have this scale that say is this big, and mine is this big in your comparison. But the truth is they're the same thing, because this is the worst and this is the worst. So you can imagine, you just imagine the worst to a higher degree or a more intense degree.
Wow.
You know, like if you've ever drank, wine or something like that, right? It's a bad comparison, but if you've ever had wine and then you went and drank fortified wine,
yes,
that's just a stronger version of that wine. It's just you know.
And now we do want to move towards a little break right here, a little studio break. But before we do, I want to clarify that. So do you think that each one of us is capable of responding or dealing with those different levels of intensity? In other words, you know, you made that comparison between somebody in a domestic situation might think getting fired from their job is the worst thing in the world, whereas you've been fired at
Right, yeah,
by an
different type of
AK-47
fire.
or a bomb, you know. Do you think, though, that everybody has the capacity to respond when they're put in that situation? Do you understand what I'm asking you?
Yeah, I'd have to say yes, because a lot, and I've had this a lot, because I've told my stories or whatever to lots of different people, and one thing I get a lot is I go, you know, I couldn't have done that.
Yes, that's what I wondered.
And like I couldn't have gone through, and I have to say that like that's not possible, because if you were there, you would have gone through it.
You would do it, yeah.
Or you would have killed yourself. So you're saying you would have killed yourself.
Yeah.
You know, because like I didn't have any option, right? I was
Yeah.
there. I had to deal with it. I couldn't get out of it.
Yeah.
So I was there with everyone, dealing with everything that was going on multiple levels.
Yeah.
But the thing is if you were put in that position and you had to be there, then you would have to be there. So the idea of, it's because your brain can't imagine yourself being there
Yeah.
until you're actually put into the position. You don't know how you will react. And people react in different ways, but dealing with it, there is no dealing with it because you're just there. It's what you're saying, dealing with it is what are you left with, right? And there are people that have been through those situations that are not affected the way that I was, or the way that some of my other fellow soldiers were, in the realm of PTSD. In the realm of being affected in those ways. And does that have anything to do with the way that they're built or certain psychological things that they've done? I find it that people that see things as black and white, that are just don't engage in any sort of like gray area or understanding or trying to understand things, they tend to do a lot better because they've put it away. They're not engaging it at all.
Right.
And so it's whatever, there was the enemy. And now I'm kind of in that place to where if I'd go back again, I would say, first of all, I didn't have to go, right? I chose to go, which is a big thing. And then second of all, the conscious decision to say, well, this is my duty. This is the idea that I am jumping on with. So I'm just going to do what I'm told and not, if I die, I die, like that's, but that's, I would only be able to do that now. Now, when I was there, it was a very different kind of idea. And I was young too. I mean, I was 22 years old.
Before we run into, I want to ask another quick question before the break, and that is about that sense of loyalty or that sense of patriotism or that sense that righteousness is on my side. Did you feel that?
Yes, but it also got kind of battered a bit as I went through it, because what went on over there was not necessarily what the American public's being told,
or what you signed up for,
and what I signed up for. Yeah, what I thought I signed up for, because there wasn't a lot of engagement with an enemy. There was a lot of engagement. Enemy's a funny word. There was a lot of engagement with people that were there that had nothing to do with anything, but would be told, given $100 and told to plant an IED somewhere, right, a bomb. So there was this kind of gray, weird area where, there was no enemy to fight back. And a lot of Vietnam vets kind of, when I talk to them, they have this same idea. If I would have went to World War II and it was, there's a hill, right, and we're all brothers, we're going to take that hill.
Sure.
There's a goal.
Clear,
if we
clear.
lose, there's 1,000 of us that died in the process. That's a sacrifice. These are all psychological things that we can put in. And we took them too. We got some of them, they got some of us, but we won the hill, right? Or we pushed back, or we rallied, or did all that. There was none of that, because it was just. I'm telling you, we just drove up and down bomb-infested roads until someone died. So when you're in a situation like that, there's no psychological release from getting normal things that we think of, like revenge. Oh, we lost some guys, let's go take some of them. There was none of that, because there was no opportunity. It'd be like if you were driving down, the downtown Bend, and you're driving around a corner, and then that corner blew up. And a bunch of people died in the process, and now your ears are ringing, and you're trying to pick up the pieces and try to figure out how to react to. There's no one there. There's no one there. Yeah, there's no enemy. Sometimes they would ambush us, but most of the time it's just pieces of the road that blew up.
So in some ways, that's also very frustrating, because let's take a quick little studio break here. We will be right back after this, and when we come back, we want to get more into the impact of that and the growth of you spiritually. I want to talk about that. Stay with us.
This book is Ahonu's true story about the loss of his first child, his pain and his struggle with grief and guilt, and the coming to terms with his loss. It forms the foundation of his entire philosophy of life and is a superb grounding in the growth of spiritual awareness. It's truly an epic voyage from the pain and sorrow of a father's grief to the new world of love and forgiveness. Buy it. It is life-changing.
Okay, welcome back. My name is Ahonu, and I'm blessed to have with me today, in Aingeal Rose's place, I have to add, Nicolas Mezzanato. And we had been speaking before the break about the impact really of the trauma of war. He was in Iraq in 2005. And now, though, is really walking a really amazing path as a spiritual being. And I use the word blessed because I believe that we are blessed to know him. He's full of wisdom and insights and an amazing grasp of what's going on really in terms of the bigger picture. And let's now start to talk about that, Nicolas. You mentioned about yoga helping you, to distance yourself in a sense, and then how you were able to clear these kinds of things in your head, but probably more importantly, how you were able to distinguish when this post-traumatic stress was coming up for you, that you were able to recognize that you had a choice around it. Mm-hmm. How did that connect into you feeling that you were beginning to look at a bigger picture of things?
Bigger picture is hard to kind of talk about. I could talk about the emotional side of it, I guess, because what you're describing there is when we're talking about using yoga or any of the spiritual kind of technologies or processes, that's essentially what the process is I think in a bigger picture, when we're talking about being spiritual, a lot of people have images in their mind of, what does a spiritual person do, right? Like you're on the spiritual path, or you're seeking God, or whatever you want to call the ultimate or infinity or whatever we want to talk about. The idea behind that is most of ideas that you're going to become something. So you're seeking something, whether in the personification of a god or something in the future. You're constantly kind of going toward, and that's what we say, a path, right? A path puts in some sort of beginning, middle, and end, and you're going toward that place. But with the way it's been described to me is the spiritual process is not necessarily becoming anything. It's actually quite the opposite. It is removing all the things that are not you until you dissolve into and discover who you really are, which I won't talk about that because that's in the realm of, the only thing I can talk about is what we're not. And our emotions are not us. Our emotions are, they're basically like super thoughts in a sense. Emotions, when you think about something, you can think about anything, right? And you can have an emotional reaction to it if you dwell on it enough, if you press it there. And the thought becoming stronger and adding a physiological reaction to it. But it starts with the thought. That's why everybody says, what you think about, you bring about, and those types of things have come into it. But the truth of the matter is your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, your identities, your beliefs, all of those things are not you, but we want to think that they are, but they're not. They are temporary. They're going to go away when you die. They're not going to have anything to do with you. They're just right now because of your physical brain has that capability and it does its own thing. It's doing it because of the survival process. We have something called an intellect, right? Which is something that divides things. It's necessary. Like we know how to get into this room, not through the window, but through the door, because we have something in our brain that says, look, hey, we need to divide this, That's one part of our brain called the intellect or buddhi. And then there's something else called ahankara. And this is from the yogic sense. Ahankara means identity. And some people call it ego. But I think we need, there's a differentiation between ego and identities, because ego, like you need a certain type of egos to sit here and talk, right? You need a certain type of ego to, and we're different egos to different people. To a child, you have a different ego to. Yes. They're also for like social purposes, but identities are different. Identities are things that you take onto yourself that aren't you. So, and it goes as far to say things like, we say things like, oh, I'm a courageous person, I'm a hero, I'm a healer, I'm a this, but it goes farther than that. It goes to, I am a father, I am a mother, I am a brother, right? Those are identities that we've taken on that aren't necessarily true. And it sounds funny to say that, but they're extremely temporary. So that's the identity portion. Then there's another portion of our brain called manos, or memory, which is the memory, everything that we've ever taken in sleeping and waking through this life and possibly past lives, but I don't talk about that. Through this life is all there, and we can access it in different ways, like hypnotic states. You can access things that you would never have. And then the final portion of our brain in a yogic sense, so there's 4 parts, would be something called chitta, which is pure intelligence, right? And so when we're talking about our brain and accessing our brain, what we're trying to do is access that portion of our brain,
which doesn't have
pure intelligence, has no memory,
no ego,
has no identities. And so that it's what the trees use to grow. Pure intelligence, like the trees know how to grow, they know how to exist. And so I'm not saying we need to throw away the brain altogether. It's a good tool, and all of those things are good tools. The intellect's a good tool, but the intellect is like a scalpel, as in if you don't know how to use it, you can really hurt yourself. If you're constantly dividing things and putting things into categories and saying this is good and that's not good, it can really hurt you as a human being. It can ruin.
Is that where judgment comes in? Is that part
I think so. I think that a lot of that comes from, and if you want to wrap it into the big picture, again, I kind of went off on a tangent here, but the big picture of what I went through is I would divide everything into portions and say, well, these are good soldiers and these are bad soldiers. This is what a good soldier does and this is what a bad soldier does. Or this is, the enemy did this, but this is not the enemy. And I would put these kind of comparisons and these judgments, but the truth of the matter is it's all one, and we're all going through the same problems, whether you're a terrorist or you're a saint. It's all the same stuff. We're dealing with the same, process, which is we're all doing everything in life unconsciously. And I'm not saying everyone, but most of us are being driven unconsciously. But what it is we as human beings are not human beings. Okay, we're like human becomings. Yeah. So everything else in the world, in the animal kingdom, like a tiger, for instance, right? A tiger we know what the best tiger is. Like we know what the highest capability of a tiger is because we've seen it. And the tiger isn't worrying, if the tiger eats, right, and they don't suffer like we do, right? If a tiger eats food and gets enough food in its stomach and has sex and has other tigers, it's fine. It's not thinking, am I a good father? Like, no, I ate my children, right? Like, or how's my 401k doing? Am I being a responsible, business owner? Like, no, they're not thinking about that stuff because they don't care, right? But what we're suffering as human beings is we're not suffering our incapabilities, we're suffering our freedom, because a human, the difference between us and the rest of the animal kingdom is we don't know what the ultimate capability of a human being is. We don't know what a human being is because it's an open-ended. So we can evolve consciously. Yeah. The rest of the animal kingdom has been evolving unconsciously up until now. Yeah. And now we're at a point where we have the ability to evolve consciously. And that's the only way we can evolve. The scientists are saying, like, our brain is not going to get any bigger. Yeah, Otherwise, it's going to, right? Yeah. Like, this is it. This is all we got. All the fat and everything. Yeah. Like, what we have is it. And so when we go to that place, we start thinking, well, if I'm going along this process of wanting to be conscious and to evolve consciously, you really slowly understand that these things that you thought were so important, they start being ripped out from under you. And these things that you used to stand on, you were thinking were real. I am an American soldier, or I am doing this, I am doing good, or I am doing bad. When that sheet gets ripped out from under you, you realize that you were just grasping at holograms. They weren't real to begin with. They were ideas that you came on, and they became real for you, and they can be extremely real. And we see this in the form of Islamic extremism, but I'll say any belief system that you're taking on, because a belief system, and I'm just rambling now.
No, but you're not, system, because seriously, we wanted to talk about it. Because in a sense, everything is a belief system, really. But let me just pop back for a moment when you spoke about animals. The way I heard that described was about the behavior of a cat when it's stalking a mouse. And it's ready to pounce, and its back legs are really winding up. It's like a spring ready, right? And all its senses are on hyper alert. And then it takes the pounce. But if it misses the mouse, if the mouse escapes, the cat doesn't go into a whole big rigmarole of regret and trauma about the whole thing. It actually comes back.
Doesn't go to a cat psychologist and try to process why he's missing cat and mice, and how that affects his
fireplace, and it curls up and it licks itself, and it kind of says, "Oh, tomorrow's another day."
Yeah, exactly.
We get another mouse tomorrow.
And that's why they don't suffer the way that we suffer. Like they don't have that capability, and because we have that freedom, we're suffering our freedom. We as humans, we suffer everything. If we have a job, we suffer having a job. If we don't have a job, we suffer not having a job. If we have kids, we're like, oh. If we don't have kids, we're like, man, I wish I had kids, right? Wow. Like everything in existence, we are suffering our freedom more than we're suffering any type of
that's interesting. I've never heard anybody put it in that way. But what I did notice you did say, excuse me, what you did say, Nicholas, was you used terrorist and a saint in the same sentence. Now, I understood what you were saying, but I want to come back to it just for the moment, because when you were talking about the 4 levels of being, let's call it.
Sure, in mental capability, in the mind. Because we say mind, real quick, we say mind and we think, oh, mind, right? Use your brain. Like, well, what area?
We think we know it. Yeah, we think we know what we're talking about. But in that, where is forgiveness in all of that? Because I can see where you were going with, the terrorist and the saint and a belief system. If they're all belief systems, which we understand them to be, and you're using these 4 different levels of capability, where does forgiveness fit into that?
Well, this one's hard to do without tweaking some heads, because
No, let's tweak the heads. That's what we're here for, and it's why I wanted you to come in.
Here's the problem with the brain, right? So the brain, and all 4 levels of the brain, at least to my understanding, are like this. So the problem with trying to talk about these types of things, this is even modern scientists are having problems with this, is they're going into a place that they're using their brains, and it gets to a point where it's called fuzzy logic, right? Because it doesn't make any sense anymore, but it works, right? And they can prove it mathematically, right?
Sure.
So when you start talking about these things, when you're talking about forgiveness, you're really talking about being grasped in the realm of relativity. So for the brain to work, for logic to work, you need two. Because the only way for the brain to engage anything, you need a comparison. So the only way that your brain can understand anything is if it can compare it to something else.
This is
and
where we
most
have
of the time,
polarities.
polarity, yeah.
Right.
So within the realm of creation, there are pairs of opposites. There is hot and there is cold, right? But the truth of the matter is there is no hot or cold. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't make any sense. It's like,
It's
well,
you perceiving it.
exactly. So hot is what? 425 degrees, 500 degrees? That's hot, right? That would burn my hand. But the surface of the sun is what?
Oh, I don't know. If there were thousands or millions even.
Right, exactly. So in comparison,
Yeah.
425 degrees or 500 degrees that would burn your hand is ice cold compared to that. Now that compared to that, and it never ends, right?
That's right.
So the truth is things are only different in degree in the physical realm, but the truth is two pairs of opposites are actually the same thing. So when we're talking about spirituality, the true spirituality, it's not in the realm where there are two. In that realm that we're talking about, there is only one. There is no yes and no. There is only yes and yes. There is no hot and cold. There's only hot and hot. There, and in that oneness is there. So when you're talking about forgiveness, and I know that this is kind of a head tweaker, is the only way that you need to forgive anything is if you are living in the realm of polarity. If you have separated yourself, or at least you're going that way, and I'm not saying that I've arrived there. This is kind of an intellectual understanding that I have. This isn't necessarily an experiential understanding. I know that that's going to happen at some point. But when you're thinking about forgiveness, you're thinking that there is some sort of difference between me and that terrorist. You're thinking that there is a division, but the truth is there is not. There is no division. The only difference is things that we've accumulated in the realm of polarity, and that's all temporary,
Yes,
right? So
yes.
for the 80 years or whatever I'm on the earth, these are things that I've engaged with mentally, which are moral things which don't even exist. You know, when we talk about morality, and this is another head tweaker, because that's really what the problem is what are morals? When we say morals, we're saying what I understand of what I've been brought up in and what you understand of what you've been brought up in are morally opposed to each other, right? But the truth is morality is derived not from some sort of spiritual place. It's derived from wherever you were brought up in.
Learned.
It's learned. So if you were, for instance, I grew up and we have ideas about women, and I'll tell this real short story because I know we don't have a lot of time. But we have our ideas of how women are treated and how they're not treated and everything in Western society. And I grew up of kind of you protect women, right? And I realize now that comes from I gathered that wasn't something I came up with on my own. But I was driving down the streets of Baghdad and I looked over and there was like this probably 17, 18-year-old man punching this 14-year-old girl in the face repeatedly. I'm talking like Mike Tyson boxing this girl. Wow. And I jumped out of the truck, and everybody kind of jumped out of the truck, and I came over and I slammed this guy up against the wall, and I said, "What are you doing?" And all of a sudden, this cacophony of women came around, no, because I spoke Arabic there. They're saying, la, 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 and they're going in, telling me, this is okay, this is okay, this is okay. It's his sister, and she went to the market without telling him. And they looked at me with like this, yes, this is right. And he's like, I'm sorry, but he's like, I had to, this is what we do. And I was like, what are you talking about? And even the young girl was like looking at me with her one good eye, like, yeah, I should have told him. And I'm like, what? Right? It didn't make any sense to me. But the thing is I'm not saying it's right or wrong. What I'm saying is as far as that young man was concerned, he was doing the right thing, that if he would have let her do that, that would be worse than what he was doing. Sure. Allowing her to think that she could just run off and do whatever she wants without being punched in the face.
In lots of ways, it was a judgment on your part from your upbringing that you looked upon that as being something wrong.
And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong, and I'm not making any judgments on that. I'm just saying that is what it is. Yes, and when we're talking about morality, the morality that we have is because we were there. Had we grown up in that system, we would have those morals. Sure. Now, in breaking down of everything that we are in the spiritual process, I have a sneaking suspicion that all of those things would get shed loose anyway as you're going through the process of trying to release all of the things that aren't you.
Right. To
be able to commune with that which is not. I don't want to talk about God. I mean, it's just a word that we're talking about, but that's what we're pointing to. Yes. As we get rid of all of that stuff, what's going to be left is that. And I've met people that are the living embodiment of that. And you can tell they don't have any, desires, or they don't have any preconceived ideas. They don't have any motivations. They're just there, and they do what they want to do consciously. And I want to become like that eventually. Wow. I'm not there.
Wow.
But no.
Now you can see why I wanted Nicolas Mezzanato to come in and talk to us, because I think, for me, that transition that you've made, that those life lessons are absolutely wonderful, and I believe that everybody would enjoy hearing them. Now, I want to just open up another possibility here, because usually, as has been the pattern in the past for us, we would have an author or an artist or a speaker, or we would promote somebody's spiritual path in a way. And you don't have a book as such, but what we've spoken about today is fantastic book material. Do you feel that you might ever get to write down your experiences?
I think so. I think part of it, I was writing a book about post-traumatic stress for a while, and I was pursuing it pretty heavily. But then I realized that I took a step back from it because I felt myself becoming identified with it once again. Right. And so I'll probably end up going back to doing that. But I'd have to be able to put myself in a position where I'm just doing it because I want to do it, and I'm not being pulled by some by some desire. Well, that could be there.
The Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the way he described that, and I have to say it really helped me, was he likened life, as it were, and the spirit to the dyeing of a cloth. That you would dip a cloth into dye and it would give it some colour. And then you would come back at another point in time and dip it in the dye again, and it would take on more colour. And this is the way he described meditation, that you would dip into the spirit through meditation and bring the benefit of that out into the, let's call it the real world, or reality as we tend to understand it.
Sure.
And then you dip back into spirit again. And that this was the way the ideal way in this reality was you dipped in and out of spirit all the time. You kind of had a foot in both camps.
Yeah.
So when you talked about identifying with PTSD because you were writing a book, that thought came to me that that's only one foot in the camp, where you may be helping others understand how to get through PTSD because you have the experience of that and you can help them understand it. But at the same time, you were able to pull yourself out of it, and pulling yourself out of it is also going to help people. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't not write the book.
Right. I think eventually I'll end up getting into something. It's just that I want to be established before I start making kind of large actions. The way I was doing a lot of large actions, I'll call them large as in they're kind of hard things to do. I want to be more established in my yoga, in the path, before I kind of jump into that stuff. But I'm sure that I'll get back into doing things in the world.
I think you should, because as I said at the outset, I do believe that just raising these issues, just talking about these issues, anybody listening or watching, in some ways, a lot of the Western world, and I don't mean the Americas, I mean the European side, have not engaged in war to the extent that the Americas have.
Sure.
And so therefore don't have, now I'm talking about relatively recently,
right,
and in that way don't have a grasp of what's really going on in their lives, And as I said, we've had exposure to various veterans, and it's a frightening thing actually to see what people are going through out of loyalty, or out of that sense of patriotism, or out of whatever their motivations are. But people are suffering from it. And, ideally, it would be a beautiful thing for your experience to be able to help them to see where it's at. Like I mentioned about the cold, realize that this post-traumatic stress is on you, it's not in you, it's not you.
Right.
And that would be a wonderful thing if somebody was able to arrive at that place. Yeah. So we must draw to a close just now, but I'd like to ask you, Nicolas, and I don't mean to put you on the spot like this, but a couple of words to summarize really what's been going on in general in your life. where you are now?
I guess to reiterate it would be that the gig is up.
The gig is up.
The gig is up.
The gig is up.
I'm no longer, and I would hope that no one else would accept unconscious behavior in their lives.
Right.
That it would be a place where you really look inside yourself and to ask yourself, in terms of what you do or what you are in this life, are you attaching yourself to an identity? Like I talk to people sometimes and they tell me, oh, well, I'm a this or I'm a that. I'm a painter, I'm a carpenter, I'm a this.
Yeah.
And I say, well, do you use the restroom? And they say, yeah. And it's like, well, are you a shitter? And they say no. And usually when I tell them that, they laugh just like that because it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous thing to think about.
Yeah, but
but the truth is that.
Yeah.
I mean, you are not that, right?
It's a fantastic way
and
of
you think
making them realize that they have attached themselves to an identity.
yeah, you are not that. You are choosing to be in that role, or something's an identity that's become so strong that it's become emotionally pulling to you, that it's become part of what you think is you, but it's not you. You are not what you do. You are not your body. You are not your mind. You are not your thoughts. You are not your emotions. If you can put some distance between you and those things, that can be, or at least has been, the first step for me into accessing the different dimensions of life that I really want to access. So hopefully that happens. We'll see.
Well, now, folks, the gig is up.
The gig is up.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Nicolas Mezzanato, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Aingeal Rose and Ahonu on World of Empowerment Radio, your station for practical spirituality in a changing world.